Hey folks, we're back again. We're going to do the Uru reading of the King's stories here. So just doing a bit of reading today. This is for those who have been watching the puzzle and want to get that full breadth of content because we definitely are not going to be doing this on stream. But I hope you'll come along with us for the journey anyways, as we do a whole bunch of reading here. All right, we're starting out by going to the office because we need to bounce over to our friend's Relto instead of our own. I say our friend. We don't even know who this is. We haven't met them. I know that they told us who it was at some point, but that just has not been important. What book is this one? Oh, hang on. I probably read these on stream, but I don't remember. So this book... Okay, this book is also in our Relto. This one, I don't believe it is. Let's go back to the beginning here. Returning. It is odd being here again after losing myself. I don't feel like part of this, and yet I feel like I'm here for something odd. This restoration is not right. It's not that it's wrong, just that it will only rebuild, not restore. Rebuilding is about slicing and fixing on the outside. Rebuilt trees make fences and walls. Restoration is about growth and life on the inside. Restored trees make fruit and shade. She is making sure that the tree has begun to grow again. What is Dunny? What is this kingdom? I have read of the Dunny people. I have lived in the Dunny place. Or I've lived in Dunny, the place. I've spoken Dunny, the language. A kingdom is made of both life and belief. It's really only with both. Lives without beliefs is a kingdom of cards only waiting to fall. Belief without lives is a kingdom of the dead, only waiting to live. I know a little, but I only think I know more. I see a little, but only think I see more. I understand a little, but I only think I understand more. I seek a little. I know I will find more. I can never know, see, and understand. I can only ever know, see, and understand more. And I talked to many people today, but I don't really know them. How can I know other people? They are revealed only in their words and actions. I suppose only really in their actions. Words are easy. I talked to many people today. I am growing, and I am growing anxious. And I am growing weary, and I am growing closer, and I am growing up, and I am growing impatient, and I am growing leery, and I am growing wise, and I am growing less and less. My seeking feels like it comes to an end. Now I feel like I am called higher to become lower. I will find them again. They're calling me. I don't know why, but I will know when I find them. I remember that they showed me before, and I must find that again. I hear them even now, calling me. She has heard them. I can't resist. I am going. So quite the poetic kind of journal entries there, as this person is really struggling with their own identity, their identity within Dunny, the exploration, what they're really doing here. Can we interact with these? Should I interact with these? I suppose what we're seeing is that they were able to unlock everything, so that's great. Let's go ahead and head into the world we need to, and we'll get into the room so that we can start reading the other books. And I'm just going to say real quickly, you may hear some additional voices in the background here because this is a recording of reading. I am not set up for a usual stream or at a usual stream time. As a result of that, my family are here running around. my niece, my nephew, my brother, my sister-in-law. So if they're running around in the background and making noise, I'm not going to shut them down. This is their home. I'll try to mute a little bit here and there so there's not too much of it, but we might get a few extra voices that get picked up in the background. So I just want you to all be aware of that. Now, the question is, which one of these was it? And then there's 4. We're going to do the others on stream. So I just want to do the one. Now watch it be the opposite side. I think it's this one. Yeah, it's this one. I really want to know what that thing in the middle is, but we're just doing some readings, so we're going to go ahead and do that. The idea is we want to be able to go onto stream later tonight for our stream, which is usually in about anywhere from 4 to 6 hours from now. So, I don't know. Maybe we've got enough time to do that. We shall see. All right, I've already read the first few, but I'm going to read them again so that we can try to do this in a one take instead of chopping things together. King Jaron. Jaron took the throne in the year 555 at the age of 80. By the time of his coronation, he had already reached the rank of guildmaster in the Guild of Stonemasons. It was Jaron who first publicly stated plans to rebuild the King's Arch. In 598, headed by the Guildmaster Chorus of the Guild of Stonemasons, the design of the arch was begun. In 600, construction was started, and in 625, the arch was completed. It was a day of great celebration as it marked the first century on Earth and, because of the prophecies, allowed for the passage of the great king. As a result, from the time of its completion onward, all kings sailed through the arch as part of their coronation ceremony. As construction of the arch was underway, Jaron planned for construction of the Temple of the Great King. Specifications for the building were recorded in ancient prophecies, and Jaron made sure that each was followed through to the last span. Construction was finished in 643. It should be noted that at the time of construction, there were apparently quite a few people who questioned the dimensions of the building, calling them rather odd and exorbitant. However, Jaron would hear nothing of their complaints, and in fact, managed to anger quite a few of those who worked on the temple during its construction. Once the temple was complete, Jaron ordered the transfer of the gold throne from the temple of Rhineref the temple that Rhineref had built, to the new temple of the Great King. In 654, Jaron's wife gave birth to a son. Unfortunately, the boy only lived for 10 years before dying of a rare disease. It was not 10 years after the death of the boy that Jaron's wife passed away. Oh my. You two. Knock it off, please. All right. It was not 10 years after the death of the boy that Jaron's wife passed away, also at a young age. The tragedy seemed to have had a devastating effect on Jaron in his later years. He was known to be easily angered and extremely harsh. He remarried in 700. His second wife gave birth to a son 17 years later, followed by 2 daughters. Records speak of various accusations of abuse toward his children, though nothing was ever proven, regardless of whether or not there was abuse. It seems he was never able to get over the death of his son and first wife, as one of the prophetesses who advised him wrote in her journals. He never seemed to really love or appreciate any of them, though he did leave the throne to the oldest of them. It was Jaron who encouraged further private construction for the island in 775, including the Kedri district. He named the high-class district after his first son, who had died 111 years earlier. Jaron died of natural consequences in 812. At the age of 337, it was often said that Jaron died a very sad and unsatisfied man. We note here that the king's arch was modeled after a similar design on Garternay. It was prophesied that the great king would be welcomed by the arch, and so its construction was obviously seen as very important. Because Dunny numbers are base 25, the year 625 was very significant. Most were taken from the Regaltavak of Urpa, as recorded in the Guild of Stonemasons records, and it is not known what the disease was that took his first son. Records only indicate extremely high temperatures and extremely sore and brittle bones. Let's grab our notebook here because we've got a couple of things that we need to take note of. We've got the year 625 as being very significant here. Another note that I thought was important here. He remarried in 700, but Jakreen died in 812. And 625 was the not the temple, but the archway. 625 is when it was completed. Okay. So we've got a couple of notes out of here. There's other dates in here. There's just going to be so many dates. I'm not going to write them all down, but we may find that we need to come back and get certain ones, because this game will do that to us. Our second king is King Veesha. Veesha took the throne in the year 812 at the age of 95. When Veesha took the throne, he already had 2 sons of his own, and ended up having 3 more before his death, a large number for Dunny. Though his father had completely rejected religion in his later years, Veesha was an extremely religious man who, some say, tried too hard to push his convictions on the people and, in the end, probably pushed many away. In fact, he forced into law a number of strict guidelines pertaining to marriage and adultery, as well as oaths and vows, many of which were removed by his son. Many say the greatest mark of Veesha's reign concerned the health of his 5th son. The boy was a maintainer, and at the age of 50, on a routine check of ages, was almost killed. Though the cause of his near death is unclear, certain documents point to inhalation of toxic gases. He ended up falling into a deep coma that the healer said he would never come out of. In response, Veesha gave a powerful speech, boldly announcing to the people that Yahweh would heal his son and that he would awake again. Despite opposition from the church, 2 prophetesses who advised him, and the Guild of Healers, Veesha maintained his faith for over 3 years, until the impossible happened and his son awoke. Though many disagreed with Veesha's religious convictions, there was not a single Dunny besides Veesha who was not shocked by the awakening and forced to look again at their own faith in Yahweh. Veesha died of natural consequences in 997. At the age of 280, he left the throne to the reborn son, Mararan. These notes were taken from the Miracle written by Tashan in 1072. Speaking of Mararan, King Mararan took the throne in 997 at the age of 73, exactly 20 years after emerging from his long coma. From various speeches and writings, it's obvious that Mararan placed a strong value on life. Through his 162 years in power, it seems he did all he could to emphasize that same value to his people, as well as make the most of his own. It seems that a main concern of Mararan was the Dunny education system. The fact that so many of his own people were falling by the wayside apparently upset him quite a bit. So, in 1124, when Tylanar, a guildmaster of the Guild of Legislators, submitted his paper, Minor Guilds, Mararan was in immediate agreement with it, what it said. In the paper, Tylanar wrote, "We are creating a group of people who have no understanding of the Dunny and the strength of our blood. There's the relatively small percentage of those who learn and keep our traditions through the guilds and growing population of fools." Mararan, following the suggestions within the paper, placed the common schools under the Guild of Legislators and began major renovations of that system, including higher standards for instructors and longer workdays. Mararan also raised the time in the common schools from 6 years, age 10 to 16, to 15 years, ages 5 to 20. From there, instead of entering back into society as had been the case, students could enter one of the new minor guilds that had been proposed by Tylanar and accepted by Mararan. The first of these guilds included architecture, a branch of the Guild of Stonemasons, miners, educators, and bankers, among others. While not pushing education, Mararan was focused on his own life, making sure that he was living it to the fullest. Most historical documents point to addictions and hallucinogenic drinks and various drugs. As well, it seems he carried out numerous affairs, prompting him to throw out the rules that his father had written regarding marriage and adultery. One particular record shows of affairs with prophetesses, although both the prophetesses and the religious community vehemently denied it. The public said little of Mararan's shortcomings, choosing to focus more on the benefits he had brought them than the negatives. He died at the fairly early age of 235 in the year 1159 from natural consequences. Most expected the early death from his drinking and smoking, although many say it was somehow related to his coma years earlier. Note any relationship between the king and his prophetesses. His prophetess was extremely looked down upon, as both parties were expected to remain objective with one another and the people. I mean, that makes sense. Okay, next up we have King Koreen. Koreen took the throne in 1159 at the age of 50. Koreen was the older of Mararan's two sons, and the two brothers were apparently close. His younger brother was a guild captain in the Guild of Linguistics, and the two remained close for much of Koreen's reign. In 1159, he took the throne. When he took the throne, it would have been impossible to forecast the turbulent string of events that would start during his reign and not end for some years later. His grandfather had been an extremely religious man, and though not everyone had agreed with his theologies, there were, in fact, a number of groups who had strongly disagreed with Veesha, and though Mararan had not done anything to offend them during the reign of Koreen, they sought to make their own excuses or their own causes more widely known. The most dangerous of those groups was known as the Judges of Yavo. Though they had existed for some time, it was in 1303 that they began to make a name for themselves. It all seems to have begun when a writer mysteriously left the Guild of Writers in 1303. A few days later, books and ink went missing from the respective guilds. Koreen ordered tightened security on the guilds, as well as a massive search for the vanished writer, but to no avail. Unbeknownst to Koreen, the judges, led by a man, Adesh, were writing illegal ages in an attempt to create a race they could control and forced to go to war for them. In 1320, the Pento Age was written, and the judges had what they needed. It was in 1323, with his wife about to give birth to his first son, that Koreen's palace was attacked by a group of judges along with warriors from the Age of Pento. Koreen ordered his family out of the palace as it was quickly being overtaken, and together they traveled to the other side of the city, where a special linking book was waiting for them. While traveling through the king's arch, rumors say that Koreen's wife gave birth to his first son, Ahlsendar. Koreen continued to live in the city, although his family stayed in a secret, private age. The city grew more and more dangerous as the judges began to destroy more and more of the city and kill more of its citizens. Koreen poured money into the city guard as well as the small military of the day, although it seemed too little too late. In 1352, Koreen was assassinated by a group of Pinto warriors, being led by judges. The city was thrown into complete chaos. So we've got the first note here, known as the Judges of Yavo, known as the Regolantant Yok judges. The sect believed they were to exercise Yavo's judgment on those who could not truly understand him as they did. Great. We love a religious cult that believes that nobody else can understand the religion, and so therefore they must enact judgment and eliminate other people, because genocide. On to King Ahlsendar. Ahlsendar, the great king. Ahlsendar was 29 and living in a private age with his mother when his father was killed. Instead of immediately joining the city, he remained in the private age, apparently at the suggestion of his uncle, who had come to inform Ahlsendar of his father's death. With a few advisors who had kept him updated, Ahlsendar stayed with him in the private age, trying to formulate a plan for the war that was now raging in his city. Meanwhile, his uncle, still a member of the Guild of Linguistics, was translating much of the Pinto language and learning as much as he could about them. As it turned out, the judges with the Pinto claimed control of the Dunny government. After the death of Koreen and began to move into other ages, Ahlsendar, after being briefed by his uncle on new information, continued to wait. A few weeks later, the waiting appeared to pay off. Reports came back that the judges had killed the leader of the Pinto for fear he was becoming more powerful and out of control. Unfortunately, the leader had not declared an heir and left two sons to fight for the throne. This led to civil war within the Pinto and a complete lack of focus on the Dunny, leaving the judges empty-handed. As well, what forces there were spread out to other ages and no longer fortified in the city. The public apparently knew Ahlsendar was hiding, and with every passing day felt as though the prophecies were coming to fruition. Only the stone, while they pass beneath, listens to his cries and comfort her fear. Only the arch welcomes the reign of the Great One who guides us. Ahlsendar, they all knew, had been born directly under the arch. A new people of light, will bring great havoc to the dark, as they believed the Pinto had done. He remains hidden, while another sits in his throne was obvious. While the public waited for him, they only grew more willing to fight for him. 15 weeks after the death of his father, Ahlsendar entered the city for the first time in his life with a small force. He sailed directly through the arch to the palace and reclaimed it with relative ease, while directing his soldiers and those who joined with him as they saw him enter the city. Immediately, he established safe zones and eventually informed the Pinto that he wished to begin negotiations with the Pinto warrior Makar. Ahlsendar agreed to help Makar defeat his brother if, in return, they would return to their home peacefully. Makar agreed if Ahlsendar would write them an age to return to. The deals were signed, and in 1376, Ahlsendar led a force to the Pinto age. It was there in the Battle of the Great King that Ahlsendar led the defeat of Makar's brother, Hemelin, and total victory for Dunny. Makar turned over 2 leaders of the judges, and Ahlsendar found the other 3 in the city. All 5 were sent to prison ages, and the books burned. Some in the society had demanded execution, but Ahlsendar had refused. Regardless, his coronation ceremony took place a few weeks later, and it was said not one of the Dunny did not attend the event. Our cheering was as loud as thunder, and our pride as solid as the arch through which he sailed. Throughout his reign, Ahlsendar wrote a good number of books and prophecies and encouraged his people to forget about their old homeland and focus on why they came to Dunny. To start again, to focus on pleasing Yavo and to make good and right decisions. To know Yavo better should be the focus of their lives, he claimed. It was Ahlsendar who brought them back to the attitude they had maintained during the reign of Rhinaref. During his life, there were numerous rumors abounding about Ahlsendar and special linking abilities. Numerous witnesses claimed that he did not need linking books to go from one place to another, and numerous others claimed he could link to different spots within an age. However, none of these rumors were ever confirmed. There were apparently other rumors, much more quiet, which dealt with Ahlsendar and his relationship with the prophet Nehemiah. Though it seemed that Nehemiah had great respect for Ahlsendar, the same could not be said concerning Ahlsendar's opinion of Nehemiah. Apparently, the great king had little time for her and often found her advice foolish and childish. When he did not consult with her as a result, when he did consult with her. As a result, it seems Nehemiah was rarely seen with the great king and relegated to figurehead role for ceremonies and the like. Perhaps surprisingly, Ahlsendar rarely consulted with any other prophets, though he did have the choice. Unbeknownst to the public, who continued to praise him, Ahlsendar was working with the guilds of writers and healers on a plague. It was said that it could be used as a biological weapon in case such action was ever needed in the future. As far as the Pento, the link between their age and Dunny was still open, as Ahlsendar insisted on the continuation of resources from Pento, although it appears that some of his associates advised against it. It was in 1466 that Makar came to the palace through other books given to him by the judges, and killed Ahlsendar's wife and 2 sons. Ahlsendar himself killed Makar in what records describe as an astounding battle. 2 days later, Ahlsendar opened the release. 2 days later, Ahlsendar ordered the release of the plague to the new Pento age. Apparently, his counselors advised against it, but he demanded his orders be carried out. The plague was released. The records don't specify how the entire population of Pento died 3 days later. Unfortunately, it seems as though most of them realized what was happening and did not die before linking to a number of other ages and infecting numerous other cultures. The sickness did not affect Dunny, although the Guild of Chemists began to fear that it could mutate into something that would. Once the public became aware of the plague, they obviously blamed the Pento for the devastation, as they had no knowledge of Ahlsendar's participation in the plague. All of the books to which the Pento had access were gathered together and to be forever destroyed. Then in 1500, Ahlsendar gathered his people together to inform them of the truth. It was in that speech that he told them he had created the plague and then ordered its release. At the end of the speech, he asked to be sealed into the temple of the great king, as built by Rakeri, with any infected books, as well as any books that link to the Dunny, to their past. As he had preached, they must completely forget. A year later, Ahlsendar was sealed within the temple. And it was then that the dimensions and shape of the buildings made sense, as it was required to hold massive amounts of books. Solath, Ahlsendar's chosen heir, took temporary charge of the Dunny while the public waited for the great king's return. However, after 6 months had passed, records state that Solath uncovered the final wishes of Ahlsendar and read them publicly. Ahlsendar, he read, was not to return, and for no reason should the seal on the temple of the great king ever be broken. In addition, the note stated that Solath should be officially designated as the permanent king. So convincing was Solath's shock upon reading the note. It was said that the thought of the note being a hoax was never considered. Numerous personal journalists and government transcripts state the public's disbelief at the statements. Solath himself said, "For how could he leave us in such a state?" Though there were many calls to break the seal of the temple, a direct command of the great king was foolish. As well, the books within the seal were infected books. It should not be opened for good reason. So in 1502, the Temple of the Great King was renamed the Tomb of the Great King upon orders of Solath, and he was assumed dead. However, most still believed he would return. The two brothers were both fighting for control of the Pento. And, this is looking at the other history. So the two brothers were fighting for the control of the Pento, and Makar felt most strongly his people no longer owed the judges anything. His brother Timau felt the opposite. Okay, so Ahlsendar chose Makar because Timau would have attacked Ahlsendar. That makes sense. Our next note was from the Great King, written by Loshemanesh in 1399. And though not done often, it was possible for a king to leave the throne to his successor if he wished to be gone for an extended period of time. No records point to the note being anything but the true wishes of the great king, but it is interesting to note that it was never even thought of as a fabricated note. And finally, is spoken by the Grand Master Namas of the Guild of Healers to the Council, and that is the note about the books being sealed, for good reason. So, makes sense. King Solath. Solath took the throne in 1502 at the age of 79. It should be noted that at his coronation ceremony, Solath was given a newly designed crown. Ahlsendar had retained his own, and it was common opinion among the Dunny that such a crown should not be worn again. It should also be stated that Solath's father had been the Grand Master of the Guild of Riders and had helped Ahlsendar create the book that was responsible for the plague. Wait. Solath's father had been the Grand Master. Forgive me here. So this is the first time we're not transferring power from father to son. Solath, Ahlsendar's chosen heir. It just notes Solath. Did Ahlsendar never marry and have kids? No. Oh, right, because his sons and wife were killed in 1466. So Solath was chosen to be the heir. Got it. Okay. It should also be stated that Solath's father had been the Grand Master of the Guild of Writers and had helped Ahlsendar create the book that was responsible for the plague. Why Ahlsendar chose Solath in particular, he never stated. Regardless, Solath inherited a fairly stable culture, although one that was on the fringe of religious anarchy. The greatest leader of their time had left them, and they were a lost people without him to guide them. There were going to be repercussions, although it's doubtful anyone had sensed that they would occur so quickly. Most of all, Solath. So he took the throne in 1502, but it was in 1520 that the prophet Nehemiah, who had been the great king's own advisors, wrote the book of Nehemiah and sent the culture into religious upheaval. The book denounced the words of the great king, calling him a fraud and an impostor, and gave logical arguments to each of his writings. He killed thousands, betrayed us, and left us with no one to guide us. Why do we believe his words and expect him to still return? The book stated. At first, there was clear outrage at the writings of, and Nehemiah was declared a fool and heathen, most loudly by King Solath, who also apparently took offense to the writing. In 1527, Nehemiah vanished, and some said killed by an angry mob, and others said taken away by angels. Regardless, by 1550, there was a growing sentiment that Nehemiah's book carried some truth. There was a growing tide of disharmony within the people. There was nothing Solath could do to stem it. Those who had always thought the great king would return were beginning to understand that he would not. And they were beginning to grow angrier at the way he had left them. Suddenly, there were numerous reasons to believe that Nehemiah's writings may have carried some truth. Perhaps we've all been betrayed by the man we once called great, wrote one anonymous writer. Looking back, credit should be given to Solath for keeping his people as unified as he did. In 1604, he announced his plans to create Koreen, a civic district including an opera house and concert hall. The distraction away from the religious arguments was obvious to the public, but they seemed to welcome it. There was excitement from his proposal, and construction began in 1610. The entire area was not finished until 1650 due to varying construction problems. But when it finally did open, there was great excitement within the culture. Solath's wife passed away in 1735, leaving him with 2 daughters. It was not long after her passing away that he remarried, against the advice of a prophetess, to a younger woman named Jolatha. Jolatha gave birth to Solath's first son in 1748, and though Solath was extremely pleased, many in the religious community were somewhat apprehensive. Public records clearly indicate that Jolatha was a well-known member of an influential cult group known as the Tree. Although Solath denied that fact to his death, the culture remained fairly stable until the death of Solath in 1779. He was 356 years old and left the throne to his firstborn son. Okay, we're going to pause that for just a minute because I want to look at something here. Did I take any pictures of the dates on here, or are they on my phone? Or timestamps, or whatever I want to call them. Those are goofy pictures. Don't worry about those. They're definitely on my phone, because that's the first picture I took. Not that we really need all of the stuff there. Oh, cancel. No, thank you. Just get out of here. All right, phone, where did I put you? Because when we were looking at, I want to say it was, we were looking at the path of the shell, and we were finding some notes on walls that were of some significance, although we don't know what. There we are. None of these seem, maybe they don't seem too important, but 189, 1, 4, and these are 1 numbers, so they look like ratios. 138. Are those the only ones we've got so far? So 189, 14, 138. Yes. Okay. I'm just writing those down in case those dates do become important. This was King Solath. We've already read that one. All right, moving along. I have just a few to go, all the way back to there. Look at how far we've made it. Imagine walking into a library and being like, you know what we need to do? Today we need to read every single book. No, thank you. I love reading. I love stories, but that just sounds like punishment. Anyways, King Me'erta. Me'erta took the throne in 1779 at the young age of 31. There were multiple leaders, many of them from the church, who publicly feared that the appointment of Me'erta would cause great damage to the already fragile religious culture. Their fears appear to have been justified, as Me'erta's reign was a turbulent one. In fact, it was often stated that it was his mother, Jolatha, who ruled the throne for most of Me'erta's 236 years in power. Me'erta himself had no time to rule Dunny. He was much too busy, too focused on satisfying the women who ruled him. In 1817, Me'erta proposed construction of the Temple of the Tree, marking the first time any king officially supported anything other than the original beliefs of Rhaenyra. Just as important, Me'erta suggested that the line of the Great Zero, which had been chosen by Rhaenyra, was inaccurate. Oh. However, he did not officially change the line. He most likely realized that such change would have carried far too many implications upon the society concerning construction, navigation, etc. His goals, or Jolatha's, in such a remark were simply to question the beliefs of Rhaenyra and encourage the cults to build in a newer section of the city. His remarks were all that were needed. The temple was built with strong opposition from some. In 1843, a few years later, Me'erta sanctioned the construction of the Temple of Water and the Temple of the Sacred Stone. Both were finished in 1876 and 1902, respectively. All were built on Me'erta's recommended line of the Great Zero. As the years passed, cults sprang up everywhere, wreaking havoc on the religious beliefs the Dunny had once had. The temple of Yavo was empty, and its priests and prophets were small in number, as many had left to pursue other beliefs. In 1975, Me'erta attempted to change the rules and restrictions of the Writers' Guild, including altering their oath. He claimed his proposals would leave them more flexible in their writing and allow the Dunny to do more. However, the proposal was met with staunch resistance from Grandmaster Tremal, who adamantly opposed the king and, as the records show, refused to change the oath that Adesh had written. As it turns out, the refusal cost Tremal his life. Many say on order from Jolotha. Years later, many viewed Tremal's refusal as one of the most heroic deeds of the Dunny history. If those rules and oaths had changed, many believed, as Tremal had, the path to tyranny would not have been long behind. And that is why we exist, wrote Tremal. My computer just chimed an alert. I'm like, why are you alerting at me? What did we do? Are you just alerting to alert? That's fine too. It would seem it's just a chime to chime. Okay. No big warnings or anything. All right. Once Tremal was found dead, the Writers' Guild as a whole refused to change the proposed changes? Once Tremal was found dead, the Writers' Guild as a whole refused to change the proposed changes in the oath and regulations in support of their fallen comrade. Eventually, Jolotha, through Me'erta, gave up trying. By far, Jolotha's most destructive action came in the year of her death. In 1999, she convinced her son to break the seal on the tomb of the great king. Why she wished for such an action is not clear, although numerous possibilities were proposed years later. A few in number, there were still some who believed the great king would return, and Jolotha was infuriated at any power the great king had. She possibly wanted to prove once and for all that he was dead, an imposter and fool. Others wrote that she was interested in gaining access to some of the ancient books, as the tree believed they held special power. Still others said she was simply mad, while others claimed she was possessed and an agent of Rikooth. Regardless, the seal was broken. The act was carried out in secret in the dead of night, as even those who opposed the great king would have found such an action blasphemous and dangerous. A number of books were taken from the tomb and placed in the temple of the tree, along with what Jolotha claimed was a piece of the robe from the body of the dead king. Jolotha died 2 days later from an unknown illness. While the books she had taken out remained in the temple of the tree, Me'erta quietly ordered the tomb sealed again and much stronger. It was said that Me'erta believed his mother had been cursed for entering the grave, and he himself was petrified of it, or any mention of the great king in the later years of his life. Me'erta, known as an unfaithful man, died 15 years later with one of his lovers. Guild Healer's records indicated massive poisoning as the cause of his death. He was 267. His murderer was never discovered, although there were numerous suspects. Though he had many enemies, most agreed it was either his wife, for obvious reasons, or son, who despised his father's weaknesses, and lack of judgment. Ironically, it was that son, his oldest, whom he left the throne to. Ooh, okay. So this is got notes from the journals of prophetess Ahlsendar. Precedent existed for such a claim on previous ages. The line of the Great Zero could either point from the Great Zero itself toward magnetic north, as Rhinaref had chosen, or toward another prominent landmark, as Maerta suggested it should have been. Okay, so they don't disagree necessarily on where the Great Zero is, just on where they should start their measurements from going out from that, which is an interesting thing. Grandmaster Themis of the Guild of Writers, in a speech to the Five Lords in 7034. Oh, wow. So we're referencing 5,000 years in the future. And Rikooth was the equivalent of the devil in the Dunny religion. Oh. Okay, so mad with powers, while others claimed she was possessed and an agent of Rikooth. So they believed that Jolotha was an agent of the devil, essentially. Interesting. So this is where the Temple of the Tree comes in, and that's a big deal in our time and in the puzzles that we're looking at. And now we know that some of the books, or some of the plague books, that should never have been removed from the tomb of the king. King Gon. Gon took the throne in 2015 at the age of 144. Though he was not necessarily convinced of the greatness of the great king, or Yavo for that matter, Gon was far from the despot his father was. Unfortunately, he was never quite given the chance to do much for his people, as the sins of his grandmother consumed his reign and the throne. 6 months after Gon's coronation, the first signs of the plague began to show themselves. Eventually, the healers would discover that the plague was an evolved version of the disease that Ahlsendar had created to destroy the Pento. The evolved version cut Dunny lifespans in half, caused massive infertility for the elderly and the young. Death usually came quickly in the form of heart failure. The appearance of the plague and the eventual announcement that it was very similar to what the great king had created caused the public to cast most of their blame for the illness on the great king. Very few people knew of Jolotha's request to open the tomb. Those who knew of the breaking of the seal seemed to have not spoken of it, or possibly were not heard if they did. Numerous records indicate that as far as the public was concerned, the plague was the great king's fault. Somewhat surprisingly, because of the infertility rates, Gon managed to have a son in 2050. He died 20 years later at the age of 199, after being on the throne for only 55 years, the shortest of any king. Gon left his son a population that was slowly dying, both physically and emotionally, and there was no cure in sight. The plague ended up killing over a quarter of the Dunny population and cutting birth rates in half until its cure was found in 2262. So, although we're seeing a transfer of power here in 2050, it's going to be over 200 years before a cure for this plague is discovered. There are so many books in this room. This is bonkers. King Behnashiren. Behnashiren took the throne in 2070 at the age of 20. A record that was never surpassed. So this is the youngest king ever. I mean, by Dunny standards, this is a child. He was extremely young to inherit the throne, and his short reign displayed his immaturity. It was said that there was never any control or leadership from the throne while Behnashiren sat in it. As a result, the people were forced to look elsewhere for some kind of trust or hope. Most turned to religion. leading to many more factions and cults. Many claimed healing powers either from nature, special leaders, or Yavo himself, through a variety of different means. It seems clear that Behnashiren wavered in his stance on just about everything, including religion. In some speeches, he begged Yavo for healing, while in others, he sought help from the tree. In the meantime, he was of no help to the healers or chemists, both of which were working hard to find a cure. In fact, some of Behnashiren's speeches point to public condemnation of the guilds, accusing them of shallow efforts and failing their own people. Those who held faith that any cure existed outside of miracles and or special potions were few and far between. The population continued to die, and the amount of children born decreased tremendously. Behnashiren himself died in 2193 at the young age of 143, without any descendants to leave the throne to. In fact, so few children were being born that Behnashiren had trouble choosing an heir, even from his own staff. As a result, he chose his 179-year-old uncle to take the throne after his death. It was said that some higher power must have been involved in such a choice, as Behnashiren was far too ignorant to choose an heir. It made so much sense. So the note about the staff: it was often customary to choose a child of a staff member if a king did not wish to choose, or could not, any of his own blood. And the note about he was too ignorant to make a choice that made so much sense was taken from the writings of Grandmaster Hashem of the Guild of Legislators. Well, Behnashiren, your 120-year reign in which you never lost immaturity and gained any actual sense of control or logic, you still left a mark. So well done. King Hemelin. Hemelin took the throne in 2193 at the age of 179, so this is now his uncle. Hemelin had been a guild master in the Guild of Healers, and it was said he took the throne with rage in his heart and fire in his mouth. He was extremely angered over public opinion of his guild and made it his mission to make sure that a cure was found. Some say that he exhibited more power and authority in the throne in 1 week than his nephew had in 123 years. Hemelin was fairly convinced that a cure lay in the books of old, and he had been encouraging the healers to look there long before his coronation as king. However, his nephew had been hesitant to allow access to the books, something that immediately changed once Hemelin took authority to look through them. Hemelin seemed to be a fairly devout follower of Yavo, and often claimed that only Yavo would heal them, not the other gods that his people were seeking. In 2255, Hemelin became extremely ill, and most thought he was about to die. The Guild of Healers continued to try to prevent death, but the prognosis was very grave. It was during his days on the sickbed that he met a woman named Lanaren. She helped to care for him, and as time passed, Hemelin found himself living just to see her one more time. As he wrote later, Lanaren must have felt the same way. The new love seemed to forge a new will to live. Hemelin recovered, and to the day he died, praised Lanaren for the reason he was able to defeat the plague. 2 years later, Lanaren helped the rest of the Dunny defeat the plague. Rumors say that while searching through the old histories that her relationship afforded her access to, she found hints as to where more of the old Dunny books had been kept. It was a few months later that the Book of Bereni, a particular book that Hemelin had always sought, was found. 6 years after the discovery, the Guild of Healers, led by Guildmaster Jason, considered the plague cured. Records point to a tremendous celebration like had never been seen before. A newfound optimism spread throughout the culture, and unofficially, the Dunny Renaissance began. It should also be noted that on this day in 2262, King Hemelin and Lanaren were wed in a grand ceremony. In 2070, the first post-plague child was born, and Hemelin promised to give him the throne as a symbolic gesture of hope and celebration. Though Hemelin tried to use the end of the plague as a tool to encourage his people back to Yavo, it did not seem to succeed. Instead, there seemed to be a newfound love of the culture itself, of the arts, of technology, and a further exploration into the truths of the universe. In 2350, the Minor Guild of Miners, following the encouragement of Hemelin, announced their plans for drastic improvement in mining methods and technologies. Hemelin left an upbeat but rather dazed culture to his successor when he passed away at the age of 342 in 2356. Wow. So we went from this plot of people living around 300 years to suddenly having an age, children not being born, defeating the plague, getting back to life. And the first king, the king who was there and seated with the defeat, which, interestingly enough, was the tools to defeat the plague were being kept away by previous kings, which makes sense because the great king would have wanted the tools of the creation of the plague hidden. And unless being willing to bend the rules later, if it had resurfaced, they had done, I'll add, they had done what they could to prevent it from affecting the Dunny people and being present in their worlds. The only way to cure it was to gain access to those things which they didn't want people to have for fear that essentially it would spread. So that's interesting. But this person, after all that, ends up living 342. It doesn't mention any children. And the heir was of the first child born after the cure of the plague was announced. Though others did live through the illness, healer records indicate that a 95% fatality rate once the disease reached its later stages. Oh my gosh. So it wasn't quite a miracle that he survived, but 5% chance of survival is not looking good. A drink was developed that prevented the body from contracting the illness even when directly exposed. They created a vaccine. A drinkable vaccine, no less. All right. The next book is missing. So our king after King Hemelin, do we have a name for this king? In 2270, the first post-plague child was born, and Hemelin promised to give him the throne as a symbolic gesture of hope and celebration. Okay, do we have the name of the missing book? King Hinash. Let's see if we can find something in here. King Hinash took the throne in 2533. So we are also missing 2356. Is 2533. And we are missing that middle. Hinash took the throne in 2533 at the age of 66. Hinash's first major accomplishment was the ordering of the construction of the new Guild of Miners facility. The construction marked the first use of extrusion in construction, and work begun in 2577 and finished in 2580. Marked a much faster and more efficient means of building. I love this with extrusion. It's like they're doing 3D printing of buildings or concrete pouring or something like that they hadn't been doing before. Hinash had been a member of the Guild of Stonemasons before his coronations. As such, records point to him being extremely interested in the mining and construction technologies that were being pursued. As well, Hinash was one of the strongest proponents for the expansion within the cave system. Though Hinash's push for expansion was not met with much enthusiasm at the time, it set the foundation for greater expansion that would occur under the reign of his son Needrah, with sculptor Rakeri leading the charge. Hinash was apparently also very interested in pursuing better relationships with other cultures, often pushing for further interaction and increased trade. He not only opened up the rules on trade, but also pushed the cultural rules concerning relationships with those of non-Dunny blood. In 2709, 5 years after the death of his first wife, who died giving birth to his fourth son, Hinash married a woman of non-Dunny blood. The fact that the marriage was met with little opposition was a sign in itself of the relaxing attitude of the people toward the outsiders. The effect of such actions upon the culture was grand. Foreign materials were used much more in construction, as well as in clothing and jewelry, and foreign music and art. Influence began to show itself in the Dunny art of the day. It was apparently with some thankfulness that Hinash's second wife did not bear him a son. Though the culture had relaxed, it is rather clear that the public did not want to even have to deal with the possibility of non-Dunny blood on the throne. In fact, one author went so far as to say, even had they bore a child, it would have made for a very uneasy public to have such a being living within the palace. Perhaps taking the public acceptance too far. Hinash died in 2779 at the age of 312, leaving his fourth son to rule. So this is the first time we're seeing somebody who has a son to pass the throne to not choosing the oldest heir or the first heir. There had been strict regulations up to that point concerning imported goods and travel between ages. Up to that point, no one, most of all a king, dared to marry an outsider. And from how they came, a detailed look of what started Midas War, written in 7201. Oh. Where's that last note? Right here. So noting that had they actually had a child, this is 4,000 years later that's written about, but saying if they had bore a child, then it may have been taking the public's acceptance too far. And looking at the detailed history of a war, this is referenced. So we've got the Tale of a War coming up. We've got 2 more books before we get a nice break here at the halfway mark through the Kings of the Dunny. Oh my gosh, this is a lot. On to King Needrah. Needrah took the throne in 2779 at the age of 75. Needrah had been a member of the minor guild of sculptors at the same time as the great sculptor Rakeri. And as a result, the two were excellent friends. As Needrah took the throne, Rakeri, who was 4 years younger, was starting to be recognized. Those who had seen his work were already claiming him as one of the greatest artists Dunny had ever seen, even though most had never heard his name. Needrah had always been a proud supporter of cave expansion, and once he gained the throne, made it his mission to make sure that his people felt the same way. Needrah's 3 older brothers were very close to him, and in fact, took the role of his closest advisors. Each was a guild master, with the oldest with the Guild of Miners, second with the Guild of Stonemasons, and the third with the Minor Guild of Architects. Because of their positions, each ended up having a great effect on the accomplishments of Needrah. Most of the evidence supports the fact that it was not Needrah's persuasive speeches or motivational abilities alone that pushed the expansions, but also the fantastic skill and talent of Rakeri. He only needed one chance to prove his skill to the public, and Needrah gave him that opportunity in 2807 with the design for a monument to the discovery of the Book of Bereni. After that, Rakeri, along with Needrah and his brother, presented a plan for a new residential district. From that point forward, it seems as though expansion could not have been stopped even if someone had tried. Throughout the 221 years of Needrah's reign, 4 new districts were begun, including the residential Jaron, the elite of the elite districts, Ale, the business district of Kali, and the industrial district, managing importation and manufacturing of foreign goods, Needrah. In 2916, the Guild of Mechanists announced industrial extrusion, allowing for further improvements in construction methods, including unistructural buildings. Needrah passed away in the year 3000 at the age of 296. He had 2 daughters, but no sons of his own to give the throne. Instead, he chose the oldest son of his brother to succeed. From The Man from Kedri by Kemal, written in 3243. So this isn't going to be written much later, a couple hundred years, but one lifetime. Instead of joining the blocks that had been used up to that point, unistructural construction allowed for the weaving of different stone, almost like a sweater, as one historian described it, making it appear as a single seamless piece of stone. Okay. And we're going to take a quick break after this because I'm out of water and need another drink here. So King Rakeri. Rakeri took the throne in 3000 at the age of 81. In the same year of Rakeri's coronation ceremony, a man by the name of Tejara was born. Beginning in 3077, many say he defined Rakeri's reign more than Rakeri himself. Tejara was an ardent follower of the great king and spent his entire growing up studying the king's techniques and words. By the time he was 65, he was apparently appalled at the state of his people, especially pertaining to religious matters. Though he began on a small scale, in a matter of years, Tejara became one of the most influential men in Dunny history. He was a powerful leader, a gifted speaker, and a tremendous motivator, and by 3077, a well-known name. Wait. Okay, he's 77 at this point. Okay. I was like, how quickly did this happen? He was a powerful leader, a gifted speaker, and a tremendous motivator, and by 3077, a well-known name. It was 3077 that Tejara publicly denounced the sects of his people, including the government's lack of faith in the principles and laws of Yavo that they were founded upon. He often pointed to the council chamber and other government structures that now covered the tomb of the great king as a symbol of what the hearts and souls of Dunny had become. There is no longer time for religion as government and power have stolen our love. He stated numerous times. Most of the public seemed to agree with Tejara, especially concerning the tomb of the great king and its covering. They believed they should never have allowed that to happen. Although not remembered as a great event in itself, most historians agreed that credit should be given to Rakeri's reaction to the teachings of Tejara. Rakeri at first was infuriated at Tejara's speeches and his apparent disapproval of the culture. In return, he denounced Tejara for his teachings and even threatened to have him imprisoned. In 3081, Rakeri supposedly attended one of Tejara's speeches and, in an effort to ridicule it and give the other side to the public. Instead, he ended up in a public debate with Tejara. According to witnesses, it was a debate that Tejara clearly won. Though Tejara handled the debate with the king as best he could, at times his words were rather harsh, words to which the king had no response, and ended up bringing quite a lot of ridicule upon himself instead of Tejara. However, instead of ordering Tejara's death, which he probably could have done, he returned to his palace and thought about what he had heard. 5 days later, Rakeri personally invited Tejara to the palace, and later that same day announced that he had chosen Tejara as his main prophet and asked forgiveness from his people for the wrongs not only of himself, but of the kings before him. Those who personally witnessed the speech of King Rakeri left the event transformed. It was not long until their personal transformations began to change the entire culture. By 3100, 600 years after the government records showed 2,500 registered sects, there were 47 sects in existence. Only 10 of those sects' membership was greater than 500. The public seemed to return again to the beliefs their culture had been founded upon, those that Rhaenyra had taught the great king, and the great king had expanded upon. The people were again unified, and much work was done to join the classes of rich and poor that by that time had already begun to separate. There was major renovation of deteriorating districts, mostly poor, and construction of a new theater company and concert hall in the Bellari district, what had been one of the poorer districts in the entire city. In 3112, Rakeri announced, with Tejara by his side, plans for grand renovations, an almost complete reconstruction of the Great Temple. Rakeri also announced that the old line of the Great Zero was accurate and should be honored again. Yes, hello, puppies. The temple itself was to take advantage of handheld extruder technology that had been developed in 3092, as well as the great artist Fali was to paint the inside of the temple. As it turned out, it was Fali's final masterpiece as he passed away in 3123. 6 months after the completion of the temple. For the remaining years of Rakeri's reign, expansion continued both outside and inside the cavern. New mining technology was seemingly announced annually, bringing with it great prestige and to the relatively newly formed Major Guild of Miners. Tejara passed away at the young age of 218 in 3218. Rakeri was so greatly disturbed at his passing that he ordered 5 days of national sadness. There were minor protests from a few of the still remaining sects who obviously did not follow the order, but for the most part, Dunny mourned with Rakeri over the loss of the prophet. Rakeri died a year later, after Tejara at the age of 300, leaving the throne to his firstborn son, Tejara. Wow. All right. Like I said, we're going to take a very quick break. I'm not even going to worry about these notes. These are according to what they're written in, what books, the Dunny Renaissance, etc. But since this is indeed our more or less halfway mark, I'm going to take a quick break, refill my water, stuff like that. We're going to go to the BRB screen, and we will be back in just a few. Now, these notes at the top, I'm assuming are also the Dunny names of the kings. So hang on, where was the missing one? The light is burnt out even. Interesting. Oh, and the light's not burnt out when there's no book on the pedestal. I feel like we need to find these books and restore them. I feel like that's actually part of the puzzle. But there is also the Dunny writing up here. So we'll take some pictures of that. Yeah, like I said, we'll be back in just a minute to continue on. We are halfway through and we are already well over an hour into this. So for those of you watching, I hope you bear with us. It seems like we're probably going to have about another hour or so of reading to go. And we're going to try to get this wrapped up in just a bit. So back in a few. All right, welcome back. We've got the game music up just a little bit there. We'll bring that back down. We went through the first half of this without any game music, but it's just basic this ambient music in the background. We'll keep it on for the second half and give this a little bit more fullness to the sound. We shall see. I've been listening to music in the background, so it wasn't as much for my sake, but hey, I already said that's enough. The dogs are now all around me. Well, Nika's already laying down, but Nala is like, oh, you're here, and you have things on your desk that puppies like. Let's continue our reading. So far we are missing one king. We're gonna just do a quick recap here because of what is important. Coming in the door, we have one missing there. We have 1, 2, 3 on this side. We have all sorts of references to Nerif. But this just starts right in talking about Jacqueline. We don't know anything about who came before Jacqueline. And so we are left with a gap of everything before 555, according to these. So, pre 555 up to 3 missing. Then we are missing the one between King Hemelin and King Hinash, who reigned between 2356 and 2533. We also are missing from this side of things. And we go around, and then I noticed that the lights are all lit up for those that are present. And on the other side, we're missing 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the last one plus 3 other years are possible gaps here that may serve as some significance either to a puzzle or books that we need to find and replace and put in the right places. So we're going to head over here and read our next book. And if we have to read 4 or 5 books or 8 on stream, so be it. We'll read them as they come along. It was just that this was a big block of things that we needed to read. So we wanted to do it all at once and make a video separately of it. We'll be starting in with King Tejara. Now, is that referenced here? His firstborn son, Tejara. Yes. So Rakeri was 300, and the year is 3219. Tejara took the throne in 3219 at the age of 114. Though his father was considered to be an extremely decent and honorable man, especially in his later years, Tejara did not follow in those footsteps. It is said that he was an intelligent man, but that he used that intelligence and cleverness for his own personal gain throughout his life. In fact, rumors say that Tejara succeeded rather well at convincing his own father that he was the perfect choice for the throne, when most believed that one of his 2 younger brothers would have done much more for his people than he ever did. If there was one thing that seemed to direct Tejara's reign, it was personal gain. He was known as a masterful pretender long after his death, while those who saw through his lies during his reign were few and far between. Due to Tejara's nature, there is not much good that can be said about his time in the throne. The palace underwent a major renovation in 3271, and in 3279, the Writers' Guild presented Tejara with the King's Age, one of the most beautiful and amazing ages that had been written up to that point. It was later discovered that Tejara had ordered the age written by 2 writers who eventually died of mysterious illnesses after their work was done. Tejara was married officially to one woman, although there were many rumors of multiple other companions. As it turned out, Tejara was also known within his inner circle to be an extremely jealous man, especially of his wife and the other women in his life. In 3285, Tejara's oldest brother was imprisoned for the creation of illicit ages, a crime he vehemently denied to the time of his imprisonment. Tejara expressed great sorrow at the sentencing, although it was later learned, well after Tejara's death, that the crime had been set up as punishment for what Tejara had perceived as lustful looks from his brother. In 3298, a guildmaster of the Guild of Miners was killed in a freak accident while inspecting the progress of new tunnels. Again, it was later learned that Tejara had ordered the man killed due to a relationship he had had many years earlier with one of Tejara's lovers, long before Tejara had met her. Though Tejara's reign was viewed as fairly repulsive by most, it is important to note that for the first time in their history, the people of Dunny remained strong and focused even under the leadership of a poor king. The words and teachings of Tevar stayed in their hearts, and they focused on their personal lives and if they were pleasing Yavo more than their king. If there is anything good to be said of Tejara, it is that he did not destroy the fragile condition of his people. Religion was not important to him, and thus, though he never did anything to encourage his people one way or another, he did nothing to prevent those who wished to believe a certain way from doing so. Tejara died in 3422 at the age of 317 and left the throne to his third son. Though Tejara claimed that the boy was born of his wife, there were quite a few rumors that the boy was actually the first son of one of Tejara's younger maidens. The rumors never proved either way, but as both his wife and the maiden passed away 2 years after the boy was born, though officially Tejara had 3 sons, it's possible that he fathered 12 sons and 7 daughters, an exorbitant number for a Dunny. The first note here was accepted from Grandmaster Jaron's of the Guild of Writers' private journal. Next was from the Lost Son, written by the prophetess Helesi in 3422. We had a note here from Grandmaster Jaron's private journal again. From the Lasting Impact, written by the grandson of Tevar, Elim, in 3576. And finally, it should be noted that most of these facts were not public information until long after Tejara's death. For the most part, the Dunny honestly believed that Tejara had been a decent king, though some began to judge the reign of Tejara by his son. It was not until much later, when truths were revealed, that the public's opinion of Tejara truly changed. Okay, self-serving, adulteress, multiple mistresses, and would kill other men who ever had relations with them of any kind. King Tiamel. Tiamel took the throne in 3422 at the young age of 39. Like his father, Tiamel's major concern was personal pleasure. Unlike his father, he seemed to be not nearly as clever at hiding his true intentions from the people. In spite of Tiamel's inability to lead, a few worthwhile historic events were carried out during his reign. First was the construction of Stone Eater in 3469. Though Tiamel really had nothing to do with the Guild of Miners' first colossal tunneling machine, he claimed quite a bit of the credit at its christening. Grandmaster Emen of the Guild of Miners, who did spearhead the effort, was irate at the lack of mention of his own name during the speech and made his thoughts public in the days that followed. Like his father, TML carried out relations with quite a few different women, besides his wife, Shama, who he married in 3477. Unlike his father, it was said of TML that these women, including his wife, were much more easily persuaded him. Public opinion clearly believed that Shama was a rather incredible woman. Why she stayed with him through his entire life, even though his well-publicized affairs, was not clear. Some said she used TML and the marriage for her benefit, as she definitely had his ear. Others said it was because she was a faithful follower of Yavo and believed that the promise she made to him was not meant to be broken. Regardless, it seems clear that Shama was an intelligent woman who, though it was never stated publicly, for all practical purposes, held the throne from 3477 on. In 3500, women became eligible for minor guild education. Though there had been women participation in the minor guilds before that point, actresses, etc., they had never been officially recognized as members of those guilds. Though there was a push to allow women to join the major guilds as well as the minor, Shama herself gave a strong case not to allow such an event to happen in 3523. This is like the beginning of women's suffrage, the beginning of women to be seen and respected in society, although there's been influence. A few previous times it was more of a religious cult nature, and this is the first time we're seeing it in a governing way. So not until 3500, we're making a note of this. So 3500, women allowed to be members of minor guilds. Okay. So though there was a push to allow women to join the major guilds as well as the minor, Shama herself gave a strong case not to allow such an event to happen in 3523. She strongly disagreed with women being in governmental positions, a seemingly ironic view, as she was basically king of Dunny at the time of her speech. Regardless, she argued that women had much more important duties, including the guiding of children. The push for such allowances seemed to fade away in the years following her speech. In 3574, Shama gave birth to TML's first son, at least that the public knew of. For the remaining years of TML's reign, Shama focused on the raising of her son, whom she vowed would not be the same kind of man as his father. A daughter was born 30 years later, and Shama raised her with equal resolve. Again, though the people were not led well, they remained strong in their beliefs and purposes, somewhat ignoring the bad leadership of TML, and instead focusing on the high example of his wife. TML passed away from an unknown disease in 3654 at the age of 271, giving the throne to his firstborn son. All right, so we've got some notes here, including from Shama, written by Lalan. Wait, this has to be a different Lalan because this is many, many years later from a previous king. Like, we're talking almost 1,000 years later, if not more. Shama's words were spoken to the council as they debated whether or not to allow women into the major guilds. Okay. So the council actually used Shama's words against allowing women into government. And we're seeing that this is a very patriarchal society. We are seeing this is the first time we're actually hearing of the raising of children, the guiding of the young. In all of the previous stories, that has been just taken for granted. So it seems that Shama herself had some semblance of the importance of traditional gender roles. Not saying right or wrong, just that to her, that was something significant. And because she saw the failings in 2 previous generations of kings, it's almost as if she was speaking to a lack of parenting, leading to some greedy individuals who were mostly raised. Well, hold on. If we go back, King Tiamel took the throne at the age of 39, and his father, if I remember correctly here, it's funny that I have to go back to read so quickly, but okay, Tejara died in 3422 at the age of 17 and left the throne to his third son. Though claimed that the boy was born of his wife, there were a few rumors that it was actually the first son of one of his younger maidens. The rumor was never proved either way, as both his wife and the maiden passed away 2 years after the boy was born. Yeah, so there we go. So she was married to a man who was raised solely by his father. His father being a very self-centered, self-serving king, as well as someone who was very prolific in their affairs. 19 kids, extremely prolific. So she wanted to make sure that the offspring of this person, as she was now sitting as the functional king, would not be raised to be the same kind of person, the same kind of rulers in the future. So I see that more as like her speaking to it for everyone was more not specifically to slow progress for everyone else, but to ensure her place would be available to step aside and give that focus to the changing of the future through a very different yet specific means. And that brings us to King Kedri. This is a short one. Kedri took the throne in 3654 at the age of 80. Kedri himself was seen by many as a testament to the type of woman his mother had been. The day of Kedri's coronation was the proudest moment of Shama's life. She often said up until the day she passed away in 3689. Whether or not they agreed with Kedri's decisions, it seemed most did. There was seemingly hardly a single Dunny who did not greatly respect and care for Kedri. He was a king for the people, and most historians agree was the most popular king of Dunny history, besides the great king. Kedri led a number of small proposals that often benefited the lower classes. At the same time, it seems he assured the higher classes that the proposals were the right thing to do. Up to that point, the island had basically been set aside for the elite. It was Kedri who established the district of Shamathen, later changed to Kareth-En, as a more affordable residential district. Kedri also donated his own Age of the Kings, written during the reign of his grandfather, to the Common Library. He directed money to massive renovation projects throughout Dunny, including further additions to the Great Temple, the Opera House, and further renovations to Bellari, the deteriorating district that Rakeri had started years earlier. In the numerous books and journals written about Kedri, it is said that he often walked the streets of Dunny and attended events with the rest of his people as though he were one of them. He was married in 3686 at a public ceremony that was open to all who wished to attend. As one writer said of the event, if you did not want to be there, you did not want to be Dunny. Kedri eventually passed away in 3903 at the age of 329, leaving the throne to his firstborn son. So he sat on the throne for over 200 years, 3654 to 3903. And he was there from 80 to 321. Wow. Or 329. His mother passed away in 3689, so she got to see him on the throne for 35 years before leaving. And he would still be there for hundreds of years more. King Lemashal. Lemashal took the throne in 3903 at the age of 100. Lemashal had been fairly involved in the minor guild of actors, although it was said that what especially interested Lemashal was illusion. Up to that point, there had been a few different magic clubs, although nothing official. So in 3961, Lemashal, with quite a bit of trouble, forced the establishment of the Minor Guild of Illusionists. It was not a guild that most found necessary, but Lemashal argued that neither was the Guild of Actors, Painters, or Musicians. It was entertainment, of which illusion was a valid form. Ironically, it was later discovered that the establishment of the guild was an illusion in itself. While the guild was debated, Lemashal established an undercover intelligence force to keep track on the more dangerous factions and subgroups of Dunny. They were a highly secretive group, of which the public had little or no knowledge until years later. And so with the confirmation of the Guild of Illusions, the Reliema, literally the unseen, were also established. Though the previous few kings had been fairly focused on Dunny and expanding their own culture and territory, Lemashal again looked toward the outside cultures in a manner that had not been since Hinash. In 3975, he remarried as his first wife had passed away at a young age to an outsider. Unlike Hinash, who had also married an outsider, Lemashal and his new wife bore a son, his first. 20 years later, in 3995, and another son in 4014. For the first time, the Dunny were truly confronted with their views on outside cultures, and the arguments were said to have started as soon as Lemashal's son was born, as to whether or not he would be allowed to someday rule as king. Unfortunately, though, Lemashal led quite a few efforts to supply better lives for other cultures, along with freer trade and sharing of resources with other ages. The remaining years of his reign were dominated by whether or not his son would be allowed to reign. To Lemashal's credit, though, he could have forced his will concerning his son upon his people. He never did. If his son were to eventually reign, he said it will only be over a people who want him to. In 4030, the council decided a king had to be of pure Dunny blood. Lemashal signed the decision into law the following year. When he died in 4083, he left the throne to the youngest child of his cousin, whose mother had been the younger sister of his father Kedri. Okay. Lemashal did not need council approval to establish the guild, though many kings preferred council approval. It was said later that Lemashal purposely wanted the debates to take place as a distraction, which, if you're trying to establish the unseen, makes good sense. King Ishek. Ishek took the throne in 4083 at the age of 85. His grandmother had been Shama, and of Ishek, it was often said that he ran his throne almost exactly as his uncle Kedri had. He was another of the people's kings and refused to separate himself from his people or view himself at a higher level than those he served. It seems a king with such an attitude was hard to not like. His popularity was close to that of Kedri's. Like Lemashal, he focused on involvement of non-Dunny and their importance to the Dunny culture and expansion. His powerful words of equality between the Dunny and non-Dunny were truly put to the test in 4103. Ishek and his wife had been touring a food facility run by natives in the age of Yemas. As it turns out, the party was ambushed and Ishek's wife was taken by a group of natives who managed, using Dunny linking books, to easily escape before Ishek or his guards could react. As word leaked out of the event, the words animals, uncivilized, and primitive were used to describe those of the other worlds in a way that had not been used since the Pento War. Ishek fought the people's new perception and argued that not all outside cultures should be judged by on a few radicals. His words, however, were seen as empty by much of the public as he waited for word on his wife. Word finally came. The Yemas wanted their own worlds to rule, as they felt that Dunny ruled them. They had specific demands for the kind of worlds, many of which were impossible, as they had no concept of the art of writing. Unless they were given the 3 worlds they demanded, Ishek's wife was to be executed. Many viewed Ishek as a faithful study of history and, in particular, the Pento War. Because of his knowledge of history and his belief in the integrity of the Yemas, he was fairly convinced it was not the Yemas who wanted the books, but some small faction of Dunny who was directing them. Rumors say that he was even fairly convinced of the particular faction that was doing it. As was the case with the Pento War, it had not been the Pento who were to blame, but the judges who had wrongly sought power. Given Ishek's apparent distrust of some within his own people, more than those who were not Dunny, he had been a strong supporter of the Rel Yima. As it turned out, it was their information that saved him. There were a number of groups who felt as though Dunny should be completely sealed from the other cultures. One, in particular, had been especially vocal in their opinions, especially while Ishek's wife had been held captive, using the tragedy to further their own cause. It was to this group Ishek apparently directed the Rel Yima, ordering them to uncover any information they could. 3 days later, Ishek sent out word that he had no intention of giving the Yemas the worlds they had asked for. Hours later, Rel Yima informants followed 2 members of the faction Ishek had suspected to an illegal age where his wife was imprisoned. Once the public received word that it had once again been their own people directing the operations, records indicate that they were greatly dismayed. Plans were uncovered that indicated the faction was to kill his wife no matter whether the ages were given or not, to only prove further that outsiders could not be trusted. In fact, it seems as though the public was quickly learning that it was their own blood who could not be trusted. As Rhinoref and the great king had often said, it was great power they had been entrusted with, and it is our own hearts that must be watched, a temptation too great to be resisted without strict rules or willing hearts. As a result, there was a great push for more strict guidelines for interaction with other ages, as well as rules for the ages themselves. They sought the rules not because the other cultures were savages, but because our own culture could not be trusted to deal with them honorably. Ishek passed away in 4291 at the age of 293, leaving the debates to his firstborn son. So we still have references of the Midas War that are coming closer as we are now under 3,000 years away from that book being written, and multiple references, the first one almost 2,000 years earlier. And this brings us to King Loshemanesh. Loshemanesh took the throne in 4291 at the age of 123. Though Loshemanesh's reign was relatively short, it is believed he made the most of the years he was given. Loshemanesh had seen firsthand the effects of too much interaction with other cultures, and because of that, held firmly to his views, disagreeing with what was becoming the majority view in Dunny. He often pointed out, as his father also had, that before the Pento War, strict regulations had existed on interactions with other cultures, and it did nothing to stop the judges from their writings. Loshemanesh himself stated, "Those who wish to take advantage of outside ages and peoples cannot be stopped." Let me reread that. Those who wish to take advantage of outside ages and peoples cannot be stopped, must first be listened to within Dunny, not forced to take such extreme measures. When extreme measures are taken, the consequences must be increased. So saying that they won't stop them from interacting or taking advantage of outside ages, but if they do, and the Dunny people agree upon it, then consequences must be harsh, is what I'm reading there. Okay. In 4305, law was passed stating that creation or trading of illicit ages was punishable by permanent imprisonment on solitary prison ages, a fate that some said was worse than death. In 4307, Loshemanesh passed, barely, another law stating that any Dunny who coerced an outsider to commit a crime, no matter what the crime, was also punishable by permanent imprisonment. While the laws were passed, Loshemanesh encouraged further interaction with the other cultures, while continuing to argue interaction itself was not the problem. However, it seems as though many failed to see this stance and still pushed for stricter measures, on the Guild of Riders and a complete sealing off of any interaction with outsiders. In 4334, the Age of Traces, a major mining age, was halfway destroyed because of a mistake of a native running dunny machines that had been established there. Families were forced to evacuate, and in one particular odd case, supposedly, a child was born while the mother had been linking from the traces back to Dunny. Regardless, the destruction of the age was another cause of argument for those who wished to seal themselves off, and a case that Loshemanesh argued could have happened regardless of who was running the machine. Sadly, in 4438, Loshemanesh was assassinated by the same faction who had kidnapped his mother years earlier, making his life an example of what he had often preached. It was the Dunny who had to change. If they did not, he had argued, problems would always exist, whether or not outsiders were involved. He left the throne to the first son of his younger brother, as he had no children of his own. So the notes here were taken from a public speech explaining his signing of the laws. All right. We're getting there. We're about halfway through this side. We've got a few books that are missing, so, we'll see. King Ji. Ji took the throne in 4438 at the very young age of 36. The combination of an apparently immature and weak king, along with the tension that was growing within Dunny over the outsiders and religious principles, went down in history as a bad one. At the start of his reign, government records say Ji was overtaken with his new palace, life, and the luxuries it afforded him. He seemed much more concerned with what kind of food he would be served for breakfast than whether or not Dunny should pull back all of its people who were living in outside ages, as some were suggesting, wrote an anonymous author. Because of his apparent lack of concern over the real issues, it was the Grand Masters who quickly became the most frustrated with Ji. It was said by a few Grand Masters and private journals that Ji would wholeheartedly agree with them while they presented their strategies and plans, and then agree with their challengers an hour later. The indecision by Ji made for little evidence of progress and complete frustration for most of Dunny. For the first time in many years, they had signs of division. The signs of division began to appear as they had during the 2500s. The once unified religious beliefs showed signs of splitting. The once unified classes began to separate into rich and poor. The once confident rulers of worlds began to wonder whether they could rule even themselves. Adding to the confusion were the words of the Watcher. The Watcher, as he had come to be called, was the child who had been born between the ages, and now, rumors said, had the ability to see beyond time, past, present, and future. In 4500, he wrote Words, a 625-line volume. There's 625 again. That number that was significant way back in the first book. So we're going to just make a note here. In quotes, words by the Watcher. And that's 625 lines. A 625-line volume describing his visions of Dunny. Much of the book dealt with a great destruction of Dunny that would one day occur, and the signs that would come with that destruction. Many claimed that the book was seizing upon the chaos of the day and dismissed it as rubbish, while others seemed to be rather intrigued. Also in 4500, Guildmaster Knef of the Guild of Legislators brought forth a proposal that would allow the use of private education separate from the guilds. Although many seemed frightened by the idea, as education and the guilds had always been thought of as inseparable. The proposal eventually passed by a slim margin. G seemingly had little to say on the proposal one way or the other. G was married in 4502 to Hemelin, a woman who had been married 3 previous times. It was G's first. And the prophetess advising him had spoken strongly spoken against it. The marriage lasted 25 years before ending and marked the first time any king had divorced one of his wives. G remarried in 4565 to a woman 100 years younger, something culturally accepted. That's accepted, not accepted. It was the rumors that she was the daughter of the Watcher that created problems. She denied the claims, but did show quite a bit of interest in his writings and convinced G to do the same. The marriage lasted until 4645, when G's wife vanished. Some said outsiders had taken her, since nothing had been resolved concerning them. Others said G had murdered her, and others said she had returned to her father, the Watcher, even though the Watcher had died in 4606. G's final wife was one of his own prophetesses. He had sought for advice, marking another first for a king. The two were married until G's death in 4692. He left the throne to the third son of a close friend. He was 290 years old. To sum up G's reign, one author wrote, "There was a collective sigh of relief throughout the cavern. On that day, he finally left us." That was taken from a recently discovered manuscript that apparently was never published. Interesting. One of G's gardeners claimed to have witnessed the murder. Which one? I wish we had like 1, 2, 3 instead of the asterisks, but I get it. Okay, one is here. One is there. Trying to find an asterisk without rereading everything is fun. Is there a third on the other page? Because that would make more sense. Yes. 1, 2, 3. So, one of G's gardeners claimed to witness the murder of G's wife in 4645, since some said that outsiders had taken her. And then the Watcher, even though the Watcher had died in 4606, though the Watcher was believed to have died in 4606, there were numerous rumors of people claiming to have seen him and talked to him. So he had died, but maybe not. Maybe he was in a secret age or in between ages or something. And then the last one, no, it was from a manuscript that was never published. Okay. It looks like we have 6 to go. We are missing this next one. So our next missing book is from King G, who died in 4692. And our next king that we have documentation on Yableshan. Who's taking the throne in 4843. Okay. King Yableshan took the throne in 4843 at the age of 109. Though most commentaries say he held to the same beliefs as his father, it seems he was not nearly as strong and thus did not carry the level of respect that his father had. A character trait that some of the more violent factions preyed upon. Damath had managed to refocus the Dunny to a large part. However, the few factions who still desired to make their case were able to make Yableshan's reign an unpleasant one. Okay, I'm going to make a note here. This might be Damath. Damath question mark? The few factions who still desired to make their case were able to make Yableshan's reign an unpleasant one. In 4865, the Blood of Yavo kidnapped Yableshan's first son from the Guild of Chemists. In a letter, the faction stated that they would kill the king's son if one of their own leaders was not released. Yableshan ordered the Ralyama to find his son, but they were apparently unable to do so. Later, it was discovered that a key member of the Ralyama had joined the Blood of Yavo and was aiding them. Feeling forced, Yableshan gave in to the demands and released the prisoner they had asked for. The body of his son appeared on the steps of the palace a few days later. The death of Yableshan's son, along with the newfound evidences of a mole within the Ralyama, further separated the Dunny into two sides. Those who wished to end outside intervention were becoming stronger, publicly raising their cause almost daily. Those who followed the majority were growing angrier and less tolerable of those who did not. As a result, there's little doubt that there were very few Dunny left who fell into the middle ground. There were even less, including Yableshan, that's how I was saying that, who could bridge the two sides. Yableshan, in an apparent attempt to divert his people's attention away from the brewing wars, decided in 4889 to announce remodels for all of the 18 major guilds. It was the first of its kind since Dunny had been founded and warmly embraced by the guilds. Under the announcement, Yableshan changed some of the original restrictions of Rai Neref, offering the guilds more liberty in the structures they could build. In 4901, Yableshan stated his plans for a new common library located directly within the Vamen district of Dunny, a middle-class district. In 4910, he announced plans for a new park to be built on Neref Island. In 4914, 3 new recreation ages were placed within the park as gifts from the Guild of Riders in order to celebrate the completion of their new guild. The diversions seemed to do their job until 4954, when an explosion occurred on the age of Minas, killing 400 outsiders and 78 Dunny. It was apparently the result of a bad combination of gases. One the Dunny had brought with them, and the other already existent on Minas. Another push was begun to seal themselves from outside influence. The Rel'Yama, who were usually counted on in these situations, apparently had no information as to the facts of the explosion. They were still apparently in the midst of their own chaos, trying to discover the mole. There were some who thought the explosion had been set up, but it could not be proven. In 5043, Yableshan placed a man by the name of Faresh in charge of the Guild of Illusionists. His first mission, as ordered by Yableshan himself, was to find whoever was destroying the Rel'Yama's ability to gain knowledge. Thou must believe that Faresh had been more interested in actual illusions than the unseen. He was also known as an extremely intelligent man, and immediately put into action a plan to clean up the Rel'Yama. He also began construction of a house on one of the private islands of the cavern that blatantly demonstrated his love for illusions. Yableshan died in 5081 at the age of 347. He never had any other children after his son was killed, and left the throne to his youngest brother-in-law, his younger sister's husband. So we're kind of dancing into different bloodlines as we travel through this. Of course, there were some references of transferring between staff back there, but now here we are, and onto King Emen. Emen took the throne in 5081 at the age of 150. 2 years after his coronation, 2 members of the Rel'Yama mysteriously disappeared and were never seen again. Faresh became a silent hero in the key members of government, and the factions were again quieted, knowing they were being watched. Key members of the government were often seen at parties taking place in Faresh's mansion, and rumors of puzzle rooms and secret halls grew throughout the city. The house itself, located on Katha Island, was becoming one of the more talked about buildings in the entire cavern. In 5093, 2 members of a cult known as One Dunny were proven guilty for the explosion that had occurred years earlier on Minas. Both were permanently imprisoned. At the same time, Emen, along with the Guild of Caterers, announced the completion of 2 new food ages, one of which was run solely by outsiders and produced new food sources that had never been tasted in Dunny before. The popularity of Faresh's mansion caused others, mainly elite, to request permission to build on the many islands that surrounded the city proper. In 5095, Emen decided to sell many of the islands that up to that point had been government property. Records indicate the sale of over 23 of the islands in 1 year to private citizens who could afford their heavy price tag. In 5102, disaster hit the family of Faresh in the mysterious death of his daughter. Official city guard records said she awoke in the middle of the night, claiming to see spirits, and jumped from her bedroom window to her death. Rumors abounded as to the true cause. Some thought the house was haunted, while others, mainly government, thought she might have been the target of factions. Perhaps the most damaging rumors dealt with the Watcher. In words, he had described similar events taking place, and such a public event caused many to begin to study his words again. It was the beginning of philosophical chaos yet again. Varesh left the house a year after the death of his daughter, claiming to be unable to live with the memories of his daughter. The house was given completely, although no one knew it at the time, to the Relima. Rumors of dark shadows in the windows and boats silently rowing toward the island fueled the idea the house was haunted. It appears that after the Relima controlled the house, Emen himself often made visits, recommending a number of renovations, tunnels, etc. He thought would aid them in their cause. In 5202, a public ferry system was approved by Emen, offering much more frequent access between the island, the city proper, and the surrounding smaller islands. One of those islands, Emen gave to the Minor Guild of Artists, Musicians, and Actors, who turned it into a cultural center. In later years, the center often hosted outside concerts, plays, etc. on the water. 4 years before Emen's death, the Guild of Stonemasons announced Direthany. The substance had been produced in a laboratory for the first time, and it was a start of much improved construction techniques. Emen died in 5240 at the age of 309, leaving the throne to his firstborn son. Okay, so Emen, not Yemen. Yes, we had Yableshan, and then Emen. So Emen their reign ended in 5240. And we once again have a missing story of a king. And our story resumes with Adesh. Or Adesh. Let's go with Adesh. Adesh took the throne in 5549. Adesh took the throne in 5549 at the age of 49, so he was born in 5500. Though Adesh was young, it was also said that he was mature for his age and took quite a bit of advice from the prophetess Trisari, who had also served his uncle. Adesh was apparently a religious man, but not an especially accepting man. The prophet Gish arrived on the scene in 5574 and began preaching, similar to what Tavar had done years earlier. Unlike Tavar, Gish praised the words of Yavo, but nothing else. The great king, he said, was a farce, and as was Tavar. He denounced his people for claiming that Tegan was more important than following Yavo's commands. The word literally means love with the mind, implying having close personal knowledge of the other person, or in certain case, Yavo. It had been taught that in order to gain access to the perfect age, Yavo only required such a relationship and nothing else. Okay. So he denounced his people for claiming that Tegon was more important than following Yavo's commands. He declared that Tevar and the great king had used Tegon as an excuse to do what they wanted, and it was time to focus on Yavo's commands again. One of these, he added, was no interaction with the outsiders. Though Gish was not the first to say such things, for some reason, the public came in droves to listen to him, making him an extremely popular figure. Adesh denounced Gish's words at every level and arrested him numerous times, and by such actions, only encouraged Gish, arguably making his impact upon the society even larger than what it otherwise would have been. And Gish continued his preaching until, in an apparent fit of rage, Adesh ordered the Relima to kill him. It was said later, the decision was most likely the worst of his reign. The Relima succeeded in their mission in 5675. There was extreme outrage at the king, as well as the official church, exactly as Gish had taught. Adesh had justified killing a man strictly against the laws of Yavo because he felt that there was something more important that was justified because of Tegon. Gish became a martyr, and those who followed him increased. Adesh made attempts to draw his people back, but it was too late. There were apparently very few people, even ardent followers of the great king, who could agree with his decision. In fact, it was rumored that it was one of Adesh's close advisors who killed him in 5701 at the young age of 201. The throne was left to his firstborn son, Lanaren. We have some notes here about the words from Yavo alone written by Gish, taken from the private journals of Tresari. Many think it was in fact Tresari who convinced Adesh to make the order. All right, we have another gap and then just a couple more books and we are almost wrapped up here. This is a lot of reading. Lanaren took the throne in 5701. At the age of 98, Lanaren had not been close to his father, and as a result, was not much like him. It was rumored that it was because of Lanaren that Adesh's own advisor had killed Adesh. Hold on. Lanaren took the throne in 5701. Lanaren had not been close to his father, and as a result, was not much like him. It was rumored that it was because of Lanaren that Adesh's own advisor had killed Adesh. Interesting. He knew Lanaren would give the people what they wanted. Okay, so not at the order of, but because he believed that what he wanted would come with Lanaren on the throne. Lanaren immediately denounced the actions of his father in killing Gish and informed the public of the existence of the Relima, their involvement in the death of Gish, and promised to rid them from all government activities. The announcement was a shock to the public and a huge blow to those who had served the Relima. Most ended up living in private ages, while a few were murdered after their years of service to the government. The loss of the Relima again gave the factions hope that they would be able to carry out their demonstrations again. However, Lanaren also promised to rid outsider involvement, meaning the factions had no need for such acts. It's believed that the promise was not one that Lanaren necessarily meant to keep, but instead one he intended to pretend he was trying to meet to keep the factions happy He also believed wholeheartedly in the plan to build a tunnel to the island and was able to push it through in 5714, as Emen had not been able to. While Stonechtooth was busy digging, Lanaren promised that its next task would be to continue the expansion of the Ahlsendar district with eventual plans to create new residential and cultural districts. Lanaren also ordered the major guilds to begin work on replacing all ages that required outsider involvement. He demanded that ages that would carry out the same tasks, but without outside involvement. Most guildmasters knew the plan would take years and years, and though they did not agree with it, agreed to attempt it. In 5721, new technologies were developed to incorporate structural reinforcement and extrusion-based construction, some that would aid construction of districts Lanaren had promised. In 5734, the tunnel connecting the island with the city proper was cancelled. Stonechtooth had been working on it for over 20 years, but the guildmasters, who were already required by Lanaren to replace a huge number of ages, were not about to connect their homes on the island with the city proper. Lanaren agreed, as there were further concerns that such construction could affect the lake level, or even the algae within the lake. Said Stonechtooth was ordered to begin clearing out more space next to the Ahlsendar district. In 5856, construction was begun on the new Lanaren district. Stonechtooth was ordered to begin further exploration of the cavern by way of new tunnels. In 5902, the guilds announced 4 new ages to replace some of those being used by outsiders. The announcement meant little, except to have the factions believe that eventually outside involvement would be finished. In 5903 marked the first inhabitants of the Lanaren district, mostly manual laborers who worked in the adjoining Ahlsendar. The Rel-Yima were officially finished with their work in 5986. The announcement was fairly quiet, as most of their work had ceased long before that. In 5999, Lanaren passed away at the very old age of 396. He left the throne to his 5th and youngest son. Okay, so our next gap goes from Lanaren at 5999. And in each of these, we are only missing 1. And now we go to Jaron. In 6284. Sorry, dropped my pen. King Jaron. Jaron took the throne in 6284 at the age of 83. He was apparently much like his father, more interested in keeping everyone happy than declaring one side of the debates. Concerning philosophy, advancement, or outside involvement, right or wrong. As a result, though, the people were satisfied. There was further division among them. Oh, let's rewind. As a result, though the people were satisfied, there was further division among them. The elite and poor became more divided, and Though there was quite a bit of new construction and renovation in both the elite and poor districts, there was nothing done to join the two. For some reason, Jaron was obsessed with expansion and exploration of the cavern. There were rumors his obsession stemmed from the Watcher prophecies. One in particular stated, because of tunnels, Dunny has changed forever. Jaron never said what drove him throughout his reign. He pushed the guild of miners, mechanists, and engineers and surveyors to work together to create new drills and machinery. He had great plans to widen the Rudena Passage, which, when opened, would allow for further expansion. In 6430, the announcement came. Rockbiter and the Burrower were both christened in a great ceremony and then immediately put to work. Stone Tooth and Stone Eater were used for further city expansions. The once violent factions that had existed were, for the most part, dissolving. Many of their members were seemingly beginning to call themselves followers of Yavu, as Gish had been. And though they did not support outside involvement, they believed it was best to obey Yavo and hope for a peaceful solution. Though Jaron carried out a few meetings with the factions, the dissolution of the factions had little to do with his policies or leadership. Regardless, he was able to focus on mining efforts without consequences. It was a luxury the previous kings had not been afforded, and the main reason some of the greatest expansion in Dunny history began under Jaron. Jaron himself died in 6498 at the age of 297. Though he did not see the completion of the expansion of the Rudena Passage, though he did see the completion of the expansion of the Rudena Passage, he never saw the new areas to which the passage led, and he left the throne to his third son. King Rikooth. Rikooth took the throne in 6498 at the age of 56. Though young, he had two older brothers and a sister with whom he was said he often consulted. They each understood the logic of giving the throne to the youngest son. It guaranteed more time in the throne for the individual and worked well with their younger brother, as no other family had done previously. Rikooth's first major decision came in 6510, when a new cavern was found by expeditions led by Rockbiter and the Burrower. There were calls to expand the city, but Rikooth was apparently unconvinced it was a smart plan. His older brother, who happened to be a guildmaster of the Guild of Surveyors, agreed to study the cavern extensively, and Rikooth promised to make a decision upon reading the results of the study. In the meantime, Rikooth married in 6556 to a woman named Veesha. Her father was Grand Master of the Guild of Chemists, and a strong believer in Gish and the fallacy of the great king. Though Veesha had some influence on Rikooth, he continued in the tradition of his father, never publicly stating his views on philosophy. However, she had much more influence on the three sons that they would eventually have together, including the youngest, Karath. It was her influence that would change Dunny forever. In 6601, detailed reports, structural analysis, water supply, rock type, etc., came back informing Rikooth that though the newly discovered cavern was habitable, it would be very expensive to build in. Rikooth made the decision, after conferring with his advisors, that Stonetooth, along with the new Rockbiter, should begin digging out more of the city proper into the cave wall. for expansion, while Burrower and Stone Eater would continue to tunnel past the cavern. In 6676, Rikooth met with leaders to discuss the involvement of outsiders. Though there had been no major incidents for hundreds of years, it was still an issue to be discussed. In the meetings, it became apparent that though Rikooth understood the reasons for wishing to close down interaction with outsiders, it was a ridiculous thought. Their contribution to Dunny culture, art, construction, technology, and resources was immeasurable. Unless there were grand reasons not to, there was no way, he argued, that he would ever force strict resolutions regarding the outsiders. In his older years, it appeared as though Rikooth became tired of Veesha and her views and opinions. She was expelled from the palace, along with Karath, in 6700. It was well known that Karath was a model of his mother's thoughts, and Rikooth could hardly stand him. Though Rikooth had chosen an older brother of Karath to be king, his thoughts were changed. Hey. As legends told, Rikooth was on his own deathbed, staring out toward the arch, and he saw his son Karath sailing through it. He was riding a boat in the shape of a massive lizard, standing proudly on its prow, and had come home to announce the death of his mother. As he sailed through the arch, Rikooth apparently felt the hand of Yavo directing him to make Karath the next king of Dunny. By the end of Rikooth's reign, the city was larger than ever, the classes were more divided than ever, the religious beliefs were as divided as ever. Though there were not a large variety of beliefs, there was no clear majority of people who believed any one thing. Rikooth passed away in 6731 at the age of 289, leaving the throne to his third son, Karath. He left him a city that was larger than it had ever been, and fairly evenly divided in its views of the future. Okay, so our last gap is Karath. So we don't have any books right now on Rhaenyra, and we don't have a book on Karath, which we know begins in 6731. And we not only not have Rhaenyra, we don't have any of the kings from years 0 to 555. Our first king pops up in 555. And then let's do a little bit of math, and then we will wrap this up until the next stream of Uru. I feel like there's at least one more book, so we're going to click around for just a minute. Because I do remember another room with books here before we go to other ages. So we have... Our first gap was 2356 to 2533. And that gives us a 177 years. Our second gap, King Ji to Yableshan, was 4692 to 4843, giving us a gap of 151 years, which we believe was Demath, but we're not 100% certain. And then we have the Emen to Adesh from 5240 to 5549, which is a 309-year reign. Am I reading that right? 5549, 5240. Yeah, 309 years. That might be the longest reign of any individual king. And then we have the Lanaren passing in 5999 until 6284, and this being a 285-year reign there that we are missing. And we have made it all the way up to the year 6731, and we have references of writings from 7201 with the Medes War. We still don't necessarily know what the Medes War is, so that's kind of an interesting one. Okay, that brings us back to where we came from. This is where we started in this particular age. This is a book that takes us back. We can also... Oh, there is a huge space here. Oh my gosh. This is a very big place, so I don't think we will be digging in much here. Just taking a quick look around, because we had seen a number of other books when we explored this the last time we streamed it. And we had come down here. Yes, we went through here. Can we run up these stairs? We can. Yay! Nothing like gravity that messes with our walking patterns. This is a bit of a run. I just remember that we did this because we decided we were going to read that later. I feel like this is the way that we went. It might have been the other way, but I just remember there were more books, so I wanted to run and see if there was more that we need to read before going back to stream. We're not going to click on anything to interact other than just reading some books. Normally I would be giving you commentary on all of this, but given the nature of this particular video, we are just cruising through. And up here, we have a linking book. We have construction barriers. That's it, and this crystal. Okay, maybe I didn't go this way, because this is a long journey. This age is huge. I assume we are looking at the city itself. With the various districts and construction and collapse and all of these things. We've got doors that are locked at the moment. I'm sure we did not run down around that loop. I thought we had, but there got to be a point where I was like, this is new. Okay. For a second, I thought maybe that was the tree. That's a locked door. That's a locked door. Interesting that we've got grates over everything. Oh. The ferry. You are here with Tokata and Tokata 2. Other way around. No, that was correct. The museum. The guild hall. The ferry's down below. Okay, so we're... Oh. So when we went down below, we were able to take the ferry and get to here, and now we're up above where that was. Okay, cool. And then in addition, we also have the palace is here, the library off in the distance, and the concert hall here. So we have a lot to explore here. This is probably one of our biggest ages that we've seen. I want to look at that, but I don't want to look at it without it being on stream. So, yes, we are going to have lots and lots to look at. Really excited to see more of this. We're going to find a good time to do our next Uru stream. I hope you will all join us for that. If you aren't already, come and give us a follow over at twitch.tv/Violacious. Of course, we'll put the link in the description. You know how we do. So yeah, thank you. Oh my God, full color. Thank you to everybody who has sat through this just shy of 3 hours of reading books. If you like reading books, stories, just having us read, we do a little bit more edited, cleaner reads, not the live reads, with some other books. So we've got Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, some of the Grimm fairy tales, and if chat does what they need to do in a couple of weeks, we will have more reads coming up soon. We do tend to stick to public domain works, so let us know if you've got any recommendations or if you have a book of your own that you would like us to narrate. We are happy to do that as well, and looking forward to doing more narration work in the future. So definitely reach out. But right now, you know the drill. Click down below, click that subscribe button, click that like icon, make sure that bell is lit up to get notified when we post new videos. We post more videos than we notify on, so those will be rare notifications anyways. But do that and join us on Twitch for our live experiences, interacting with chat as we struggle and beat our heads against the walls in puzzles like those in the worlds of Mists and Uru and other very challenging puzzle games. But that's all for now. So thanks. Bye.